Hello, I'm Jimmy Snow. I'm the executive producer and founder of The Line. And the reason why I'm bringing that up is not just self-aggrandizing. It is because it is important to me that you understand the decision that I have made and am about to present to you is my decision. And if you're mad about it, the person to be mad at is me, because I'm not going to tell you who at the channel agreed with it and who, if anybody at the channel, disagreed with it. You're not going to ever find that out unless, I suppose, they try to attack me or expose me, but I trust my friends here. I like the people I work with. I try not to set hard rules usually, certainly not on the hosts, and then even there are rules obviously for the audience in the live chat calls and stuff, but we try to be as flexible as we can. However, this will not be a time that we are going to meet at all with flexibility. I woke up 3 hours after the event happened last night, and the event I'm referring to is an attempted assassination on Donald Trump at a political rally that is going to follow or be followed by, in a few months, an election. Because at the moment, the democratic process, while very flawed, and I'm not stoked with the two sides we have, is still ongoing, and voting is still an option. And as such, we are not going to platform any type of "this violence was justified" or any sentiments of conspiratorial thinking. And I cannot tell you how disappointed I am that over the last, right now it's about 8 hours. By the time you see this, it will be more. Actually, it's more like 10, I think. How disappointed I am in so many people who I understood to be a part of the skeptic community and the secular humanist community show that their values on those are malleable when it comes to somebody they dislike. Shows that when a conspiracy would be more convenient to adhere to, they will do so early on. This isn't to say that anything is impossible. However, adherence to, or even just the spreading of, hey guys, doesn't this seem staged? When it is so raw and there's so little information, this is an incredibly disappointing thing that I got to witness from, again, people I consider friends and people I consider colleagues. I'm not going to deep dive in the overall thing. I'm actually going to do that over on my own channel, and your favorite line host might be doing that too. And what they do on their channel will be totally their business, obviously within reason. If somebody who worked here suddenly was like, yeah, now I do support Trump, Project 2025, I assure you we would fire them, but those people don't exist. They don't work here anyway. Unequivocally, the position of the channel will be my position. The position of the channel, the line, the only thing that will be platformed, and this is, again, the only time I have said to hosts, basically, this is the only thing. If you are going to speak on this, it must be within these parameters. Otherwise, do not do it on this channel. And I'm not even asking everybody individually whether they agree with the sentiment or not. So some hosts may choose to not speak at all. Some hosts might decide to speak about it. But I would expect that for the most part, they are going to understand that these conversations are going to happen elsewhere, because the position will be absolutely only platformed from here: condemnation of the attempted assassination and a dismissal of conspiratorial thinking, a discouragement of people to try and create conspiracies out of this before we have any adequate information to suspect such a thing. And right now, that's where we are at. Again, I can't express enough how disappointed I am to see an atheist and skeptic community act a whole heck of a lot like the Mormons I was raised with, and I was also raised with conservative and in a right-wing movement, and I've seen this before, and holy crap, I thought we were better. Very disappointing. This is the other rule. So this is the actual rule that's important. I'm letting you know about the consistency on our side, that's all you're going to see from here, and as such, until we know what YouTube's limitations would be on having conversations, including conversations with people who do not agree with condemnation of it, who do want to entertain the conspiracies, until we know what the fallout would be, if any, if we were to platform conversations like that, even with us taking the opposing side, we are not going to be taking calls like that. If that is your plan to call about, don't, even if you are on our side. In fact, screeners, producers, and hosts will all have been informed that the expectation is, if somebody even brings it up, at most they will get one warning of, we are not talking about that. This was hard explained at the beginning of the show. If you miss that, we can continue on. But if you even mention it again, the call ends. But for the most part, if a person brings it up, we may just end the call there, especially if it seems like they would have awareness that that isn't what we are talking about. That is going to be the instructions given to all the people involved, because I am not going to risk the importance of this channel on what some rogue asshole. I think we're, yes, good. We've been on long enough. I can just say asshole. Probably. No, even just talking about this means that this episode's demonetized, but I'm not going to worry about, I'm not going to risk the channel of somebody coming on and wanting to make the case. And then they go, look, your channel published somebody speaking about why it would have been a good thing. Until we have a clear understanding of what YouTube will allow us to discuss and debate regarding this topic, we're not putting the channel at risk, because the channel means a whole lot more than just this one topic. So again, in summary, the rules are no calls about this. Live chat will not be allowed to talk about it. Your messages will be deleted and you may be timed out for a day. Live chat will not be able to, and within reason, the comment section won't either. Our comment section is not heavily moderated. In fact, I'd call it rarely moderated. So it may be the case that we just put in some keywords and then skim through. But no, if you hear that and you try to bypass it and I see it, I may just block you from the channel from ever commenting ever again. So don't try and test it. That's it for me. Again, if you disagree, I don't care. Sorry, be mad at me, but this is the way it has to be. And now on to the show, which will be devoid of those live calls. The hosts are welcome to give whatever notes they want to, but we are not taking calls on that. Goodbye. I'm Jimmy Snow. I'm the executive producer.
Oh, yeah. Welcome to the Sunday show after dark. So, yeah, here's my quickie statement real quick. We won't be taking calls at all on yesterday's shooting. My only comment that I have intended for today is going to be the same as it was at the top of the last show that I was on just a few hours ago. A 20-year-old grabbed a gun and attempted to assassinate the former president and presumptive nominee for the Republican Party just days before the Republican National Convention. It doesn't matter if he was a Republican, a Democrat, or an independent. He was wrong. It doesn't matter if he was a gun nut, an incel, mentally ill, or an assassin for hire. He was wrong. He was 20 years old, and now he's dead, something that was almost certainly part of his plan. I condemn this violent attempt in the life of Donald Trump, and I'm very grateful that he survived with minimal injury, despite the fact that I despise the individual. My sincere condolences go to the family of the individual who was killed and those who were injured. For the rest of us, the absurd conspiracy theorist crap coming from the left and the right is embarrassingly stupid, irresponsible, and a lot of the comments are not only wholly inconsistent with critical thinking and skepticism, but humanism as well. Conspiracy thinking doesn't help. Hyperbole doesn't help. Project 2025 is still an issue, and so is every other issue that we've been talking about in the entire time leading up to this. It's naive to think that the events of yesterday won't change anything. They absolutely will. But the focus needs to remain on opposing Christian nationalism and fascism and protecting the rights of individuals. And this incident not only makes that much more difficult, it makes it that much more necessary. So let's get some callers lined up. I'm here. Paulogia is here. Let's avoid demonetization until we figure out what YouTube's going to do with this. Our channel is under attack, and half of the videos from like a week ago got demonetized. And so we need to focus on what this channel's purpose is and what this show's purpose is, and we'll talk about the rest of it on another time. It's a perfect opportunity. It's a nice Sunday evening. You skipped Sunday evening services, we know, because you're here, and good for you. But tell us why you wouldn't have skipped if you hadn't skipped. It's a perfect opportunity to present your case for what you believe and why. So, how you doing, Paul?
I am doing all right. I'm on some personal highs and some personal lows all mixed together. So that's probably roughly where everyone's at.
I'm personally going to be high when I'm not on the show. Around the time that I'm in a hot tub waiting for the day to be completely over. But yeah, no, I am aware of some of your personal highs, or at least I think, and am applauding. But so cool to get to. It's been a minute since the last time we got to do a show, so we are queuing up calls right now. I want to make a couple quick statements about calls. First of all, Aaron, Adair, and I did the regular Sunday show from 2 to 5 or so, and there were genuinely some good calls and calls that I enjoyed, including a couple of theists, even though one of them really wasn't ready to have a conversation with pretty much anybody about this, and another one we ended up having a decent conversation. But as always, for people calling in, just pause, take a breath, wait, make sure you're not talking over people. There's a delay and it makes it even worse. But answer the question that we asked. Paul and I know when we ask a question, we're genuinely trying to think of the question that best moves the conversation in a direction where it's going to be beneficial to everybody, the caller, to us, to the people watching it. If you have some belief and you think other people should share that belief, we genuinely want to know why. But that's going to force us on occasion to interrupt, to get definitions, to seek clarity. I'm going to do my absolute best to make judicious use of the mute button. I think we did fine earlier today. But here's the thing. If you want to be able to make your case, we're not going to just let people spew fallacies or falsehoods. But once we start the conversation, as long as somebody's answering the questions that we have, we've taken calls that lasted an hour. Like we've had one caller on for an hour many times. I've had callers that, it might as well have been almost a formal debate with, no moderator where we're just going back and forth for ages. There are great calls like that. Please, the mere fact that somebody's trying to get clarification or ask you a question that maybe you weren't ready for, just say, I don't know, I'd like to think about it, whatever. All of those things are fine. Somebody called in earlier today and was like, and it was very clear they weren't ready. And I made the mistake of telling them they weren't ready. And then they acknowledged that they were here nervous and everything else. And I'm like, so I was right that you weren't ready. The thing is, none of that was an insult. If I am talking to you and it's like, hey, you're not ready for this, it's because I've done it for 20 years and I'm trying to make sure that you don't end up running away at the end or feeling embarrassed or bad, because all of us used to believe something that we now find ridiculous, like absurdly ridiculous. My IQ didn't go up. I didn't get smarter. I don't think you're an idiot for believing it. And it doesn't matter if we're talking about, a religious claim or a conspiracy theorist claim or whatever it is. We all believe some really dumb stuff and probably still do. So just try to, if your focus is having a good conversation to explain what you believe and you genuinely care and feel that Paul and I and the audience should believe this, that you have a case that is available, supported by evidence for any reasonable person to expect, those are going to be, and always have been, the absolute best calls. So let's see how this goes. Calling in from Oklahoma, we have Fox, pronouns are she, her. That's Fox wants to talk about near-death experiences. So welcome. You're on with Matt and Paul.
Hey, Matt and Paul, I'm back. I was on the show the other day talking about election stuff. Today, I want to share my near-death experiences with you guys.
Cool. Okay. You've had more than one?
Yeah, I've had two. The first one was when I died back in 2020. They had to resuscitate me. I didn't see anything. I just saw blackness. So, the second time was last year. I died, and the same thing happened. I did. My mind was dead. I just didn't see anything, and that pretty much, like, confirmed my beliefs that you don't see anything when you die. And I pretty much believe that for sure now.
I'm really confused. So you called in to say that near-death experiences are real, and then you described 2 instances where there was no near-death experience.
I'm saying they're real in the sense that, like, some people see stuff because the brain releases chemicals when you die. But I didn't have anything when I saw it.
Yeah,
I didn't see anything.
It's strange to me because you're talking about 2 times that you died or got near death and were resuscitated, and you did not have near death experiences, and yet you're saying that they're real. And you're offering a naturalistic explanation for them. Let me ask you this, because do you think that the fact that you didn't have a near-death experience means that there are no real ones?
Yeah, I think there are no real ones in my opinion.
Okay. Do you think that the fact that I don't have $1 million means nobody has $1 million?
No.
Then why would you think that the fact that you didn't have a near-death experience means nobody does?
I guess I didn't really think about that too much.
Yeah, I mean, you could be right. See, the thing is, I don't know. I've heard people tell stories about their near-death experiences and everything else, but the fact that one person didn't have an experience like that doesn't tell you anything at all about whether other people did and whether it's real, whether they went to heaven or hell, or whether they just imagined it, or whether their brain made it up afterwards. I think we're still kind of in this, as far as I can tell, we're still in this position of there isn't sufficient evidence to conclude that there's an afterlife people experience, and yet the proposition, the afterlife seems unfalsifiable. I don't know how you'd show it. I'm convinced that there is no afterlife and there is no soul, and that the very concept is something we can probably demonstrate. But that doesn't, even in my view, where there's no soul, which is, I think, the most reasonable conclusion to reach about brains and what brains do, that there isn't a soul. But even that, I can't say that there's not a near-death experience, or that, because maybe it doesn't rely on a soul. I don't know.
In Fox, like, if I'm putting on my scientific Christian hat for a minute, which I used to think that I was, that was a thing. Sorry about my puppy. There's a lot of control. I'm going to mute. Sorry.
Anyway, Fox, is that help? Or is there some, I feel like there's something that you were trying to get to that I didn't see or got sidetracked or something.
Yeah, I was trying to say that, like, that kind of was a profound experience to me because I used to be a Christian and I used to think that there was an afterlife. And during the first time I was a Christian, so it kind of dumbfounded me. And I was like, why didn't I see, a light like everybody else says? Or why didn't I see heaven or something?
Yeah, so somebody's going to come in here and pull my atheist card, and then several of my more honest Christian apologist friends are going to pull out this clip where I'm defending their views. But whether or not you have a near-death experience doesn't tell us anything about anybody else and whether they have or not.
Yeah.
And honestly, while I'm happy that you are no longer a believer and are now an atheist, I think the line of reasoning that you used to abandon your belief was fallacious at best, because you expected to have some sort of experience while you were dealing with death and resuscitation. And when you didn't have it, you then use that to conclude, therefore, the religion isn't real, or therefore, not just that your understanding of the religion wasn't accurate, or that version of the religion isn't necessarily true, but that you have no reason to believe in a God, or that you have reason to believe there isn't a God. In either case, it's fine to find yourself in an atheistic position. I mean that in the sense of, I am not convinced there's a God, once you've realized that the religions have not met their burden of proof. But I just want to make sure, and I genuinely hope you don't take this the wrong way, but we talked the other day about something, and you changed your mind seemingly almost instantly when there was pushback from me and Jimmy. And now what you're describing for this is that you had some expectation, and when that expectation didn't happen, instead of just saying, oh, that expectation was wrong, you went kind of off the deep end into, well, now I'm an atheist, which, I think is obviously the correct position. I just don't know that the path I don't know that you did due diligence to evaluate a variety of possible gods, or God claims. And you don't need to. I find that in the two quick conversations I've had with you, there seems to be some fallacy, and
Yeah, I
then
talked for a second.
and you seem to be easily swayed, and that always makes me a little nervous, but I'm happy to have more godless heathens. So yeah, go ahead. What's up?
Yeah, I was gonna say that wasn't the only thing that convinced me. Obviously, that was just something that kind of was weird to me. But I was looking into atheism for a long time, and every time I went to Bible study, I just didn't believe the stories of the Bible, and over time, I just started debunking stuff in the Bible, and I watched a lot of atheist shows and kind of opened my eyes to I really shouldn't believe this because it's irrational. And it took a long time for me to become an atheist. I really had to stop looking at it through the lens that I was looking at it, and I had to really critically think on the issues that I was dealing with.
No, that's fine. That's fine. And I apologize if I mischaracterize you. I mean, we've only had two quick conversations. I can only go on. I have real concerns when somebody calls in on behalf of an issue, and the only thing we get is like a fallacy and a brief assessment, and then, or some kind of, what do you think about this? And then they're like, oh yeah, I'm convinced. And you, for whatever reason, maybe it's just because you're nice and we had short conversations, you fell into those concerns. And I like to address them, because I would love for every single person who finds their way out of religion to not only do it for the right reasons, but to have a sufficient understanding of those things that they can explain them to other people. And because we need that, and it is not easy. When somebody comes up and you haven't thought about it, other than you're just not convinced, and somebody's like, well, why don't you believe in God? And then you've got to sit there and go, oh gosh, how do I best describe this? What's it about? Where's the nature of evidence, the burden of proof? How much detail do I go into? What was my process like? It makes me a little nervous. I'm always, don't get me wrong, I'm happy when people agree with me. It just makes me nervous when it's easy.
Yeah, I apologize if I looked fallacious.
No, you're fine.
But I definitely, I've actually had debates in college with people, with theists, and they just couldn't explain and show me evidence that there is a God. So
Yeah.
I definitely am not convinced that there is a God, especially after, people can't prove it to me.
Paul, you got anything to add before we move on to the next call?
No, I was going to add was that, Fox, I guess you understand generally why like that's not a great rationale, right? Like that a Christian might come back with, maybe God knew that you were going to be resuscitated, so he didn't give you that experience, or you didn't have, you weren't deep enough into brain death to have that experience, or because there's just a lot of controls that weren't adequate for you to draw the level of conclusion that you came to. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can see
But
where it's a weak argument.
I do love, though, that you are looking for, one of the shocks for someone like me who's relatively recently out of theism is that, you have to start reimagining, like, what was that then what did I feel when I got baptized? Like, what did that thing mean? And what did it mean when all those times when I thought God answered my prayer, what were those? And, you do have to, start critically evaluating what you attributed things to. So I love that you're on that path, and keep on it.
Yeah, I'll definitely going forward not like rely on a single thing. I just need to have a
just because an experience is just because an experience isn't good evidence for someone else, that doesn't mean you can't be meaningful for you. It's just one of those things you just kind of need to acknowledge that your lack of it isn't going to be meaningful to someone else. So, but hold on to it, and
someone else may have had one.
But it's definitely a data point for you. So hold on to it.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
Yeah, I've grown a lot since deconverting, so I think I just need to continue on my path.
Sounds good.
All right. Well, thanks, Fox. I appreciate the call.
No problem. I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Take care. Yeah, she called the other day. And when Jimmy and I went live for our Cuz I Wanna about whether or not Biden should drop, and she called in specifically, and she called in near the end of the show and got an earful in about the nicest way, but she was basically calling in to say like Biden should drop so that RFK Jr. Can run properly. And like her first question was, what do you guys think of RFK Jr.? And Jimmy and I are like, he's a dangerous idiot right off the bat. Just and it seemed, and I get it. Even when it's me and Paul is genuinely one of the nicest people. I love Paul dearly, but Paul is occasionally overly nice for my flavor, just like I am occasionally overly not nice for Paul's, and everybody else's. I know it. I get it. And I especially get how difficult it can be calling in to a show where there's two people who do this all the time, who've heard seemingly everything and who are live with an audience. And let me just get to the point and boom, spitting truths and whatever else. That can be a lot for people. So I appreciate how she handled that. But we've got Theist calls lining up now in the queue. We have calling from Texas is Ashton, pronouns are he, him, saying the miracles in the first century are true and none compare with those of Jesus. I'm a little confused. Ashton, what's going on? You're on with Matt and Paul. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing pretty good. I guess to clarify, I just want to tackle the objection that I hear a lot, that Jesus was just another traveling preacher in the first century, apocalyptic preacher, and that his miracles are just like the other miracles of other rabbis at the time, and that there's nothing unique about them. I don't know if I'm... Yeah.
Ashton, I'm happy for you to do that, but I can tell you that, and while I'm reluctant to necessarily speak for Paul, I think that Jesus's miracles are absolutely on par with all of the other miracles in that we don't have sufficient evidence to believe that any of them actually occurred. But I'm not and have never made an argument that Jesus's supposed miracles are just like everybody else's and should be dismissed. So you may want to kind of refocus what it is you're defending, because the only thing I care about is, did they actually happen? And do you have sufficient reason to determine that these miracles happened? And do we have sufficient reason to say we understand what the cause of these miracles, that they were necessarily divine or whatever else? So hopefully that helps, but the floor is now yours.
Yeah, okay. I think that's a better summary of the position. Yeah, so basically that we have all these like miracle claims from the first century, not just from Jesus, and so that Jesus was just one among several Jewish rabbis who had a following who attributed like these claims to him. So the difference is, so my argument is that the kind of accounts that we have in the Gospels don't really read like legendary accounts or like hagiographies of different saints and Jewish rabbis. And I think a good example would be like the stories from the Talmud or the Mishnah from Jewish rabbis of the first century. I don't know too many off the top of my head, but I just know that those kinds of stories include a lot of like absurdism, or not so much absurdism, but frivolity. So like there's a lot of miracle accounts you'll hear from the lives of different, I guess, Jewish preachers, which are a lot easier to dismiss than the miracles from Jesus, because they're like, I know in one case, there's a story about two rabbis who got into a fight, a drunken brawl. One of them killed the other, and then prayed to God and raised his friend from the dead after he had just killed him. Stories like that, which just seem kind of frivolous. It's like, what's the point of God working a miracle in this specific case? But
so, Ashton, can
I
interrupt for 1 second? So, I just happen to have been doing a bunch of research on first century apocalyptic prophets. That's just weirdly, coincidentally, a thing I've been reading up on recently. Now, it seems a little bit strange to me. It seems like your argument, and Matt's point still very much stands. I don't think this relates to Matt or me at all. But you seem now to be arguing that Jesus is very different, but you don't seem to have nailed down what he is different from or who he is different from. And it doesn't seem like if I asked you for a list of other miracle workers in the first century, that you could give that to me. And it makes me a little bit concerned that you are special pleading Jesus versus these other things when you haven't even really read these other things. Am I correct in that? Like, am I hearing the right? Can you name some of these first century?
Well, so that's actually what I wanted to discuss. Is since I know specifically you have been reading about apocalyptic preachers in the first century, like what kind of miracle claims are comparable to the kinds that we see in the gospel? Just to get specific, because the one I know of.
No. Hang on.
Yeah.
I need to interject. I'm gonna. I definitely want Paul's question to get answered, but I want to make sure that we're clear. When you're done talking about this, we still need to go back to present one miracle and how we know it even happened, because the characteristics of the stories and how they may differ are completely irrelevant and useless if we don't have reason to believe that a miracle actually occurred. I'm not, I mean, I feel bad because I'm kind of derailing away from Paul's point, but we still haven't addressed the thing I asked a while ago.
Okay. Yeah, because I called in to address the specific objection that the miracle claims in the Gospels aren't unique. But how can we determine whether?
Ashton, have Paul or I, either one, made that case?
I did. So Paulogia put out a video about his theory for the origins of Christianity, and he does make a passing reference. I mean, in that video, he says each point can deserve its own chapter in a book, but he does make a passing reference to the fact that Jesus is one of many apocalyptic preachers in the first century who had miracle claims attributed to him. So
what I claim, just Ashton, to be clear, what I claim is that Jesus's message is very mundane for the first century. His message,
Okay.
not the miracle claims. The miracle claims, I'm going to give you 2 sentences on this, and then we will go back to Matt's point because I think it'll wrap it up. Almost everything we know about the first century messiahs comes from Josephus, the historian, and he writes about it entirely from a political point of view. And so he mentions that people believed they did miracles, but Josephus goes into no detail at all because he doesn't believe that they did the miracles. He's just merely saying he drew this large crowd because he was known as a miracle worker, which is actually, even if you want to take the interpolation, that's the Testimonium Flavonium, that's all he says about Jesus too, is that he was known as a miracle worker. So in that way, he absolutely, was. So I would encourage you, if you care about this, I've never made this argument about miracles. Matt's never made this. So if you're talking to someone, you need to go and research some of those other things. But let's talk about testimony. Let's talk about how we know Jesus did a miracle. Fire at us what the best one, how we know. Let's pretend none of the rest of those comparisons were happening. Get us.
Okay. The best one. Best one.
Best evidenced.
So So there's a lot of ways I can go with this. So I guess healing the leper. I'll just go with that one. So I know he heals a leper outside, I believe, the city of Jerusalem. And then he's forced to quarantine afterwards, after getting in contact with him. I think that is good evidence because there's many eyewitnesses involved. The fact that it is a major point in Jesus' mission, like why he tells the leper to be quiet, why he's sort of a little more low-key about doing miracles afterwards, is because he doesn't want to attract the wrong kind of attention. So I think that is a good place to start.
What makes you think that there are eyewitnesses?
So, are you arguing from a mythicist point of view that all these stories are contrived, or this one specifically?
Ashton, a question isn't an argument.
Yes.
All he asked was what makes
I want to understand the motivation.
He's asking you what makes you think there were eyewitnesses. All you have to do is say, I'm convinced there are eyewitnesses because. It doesn't matter if Paul's a mythicist or I am or what position we have on any of this. The only thing that matters is what makes you convinced there's an eyewitness.
I'm convinced it was an eyewitness account because of the number of people involved. Oh, so no, eyewitness, I would say it's not I don't think there's sufficient evidence to believe it's a direct eyewitness account, but I think there's sufficient evidence to say that the tale derives from eyewitness accounts, that it was initially preserved either in oral tradition and then recorded later in the Gospel of Matthew.
We need to pause for a second. So, which account of healing a leper are you talking about? Are you talking about the one at the beginning, Matthew 8?
Matthew 8.
Matthew 8, starting with verse 1, when he came down from the mountain, great multitudes followed him, and behold, there came a leopard and worshipped him, saying, Lord, if thou wilt, thou canst make me clean. And Jesus put forth his hand and touched him, saying, I will, be thou clean. And immediately his leprosy was cleansed. And Jesus said unto him, See thou tell no man, but go thy way, show thyself to the priest, and offer the gift that Moses commanded for a testimony unto them.
Yeah. So
okay. So this is 4 verses at the beginning of Matthew chapter 8. And the verses say that Jesus was there with great multitudes. Where's the evidence that any sentence in these first 4 verses is true?
So I would say the evidence would be in the previous chapter, he gives the Sermon on the Mount. And given the geographic evidence, given the corroborating...
What geographic evidence? Why does what he supposedly said in the previous chapter matter for this? And what what geographic evidence are you going to give to verify these 4 verses? I mean,
So
I promise I'm not just trying to be a dick, but we're looking for evidence that confirms the claims. This passage in the Bible makes claims. It claims that Jesus came down from the mountain with multitudes following him, was approached by a leper who asked to be healed, and Jesus healed him. Outside of this passage, which is the claim, what evidence do you have that any of those claims in that passage are actually correct?
So what evidence do I have that any of those claims? So that means just him coming down the mountain and that multitudes were following him, right?
Mhm.
So I
Sure.
would say that it's the genre. The genre is biography, and like most of what we know about history comes from written testimony from
I
biographies.
reject your claim. I reject your claim that this is the genre of biography, or that even if it were the genre of biography, that it means things are true. Is it possible to have a biography where statements in it are not true?
Yes.
Okay. Then how do you tell, if you're reading a biography, whether a statement is true?
So I mean that goes more into like historiography. I would say in this case, you can't know like absolutely beyond all reasonable doubt that it is true, but you can determine at least that it's reasonable to conclude that it's true. Like it's reasonable to say that Jesus was a traveling itinerant preacher.
What makes it reasonable to conclude that Jesus could heal someone's leprosy?
I would say it's reasonable in this specific instance. I would say everything surrounding this story is reasonable. So to embellish it to like such a hyperbolic degree, to like not only attribute a miracle to Jesus, but to flesh out an entire backstory behind this leper, what he went through, and this whole ordeal, the politics involved, everything like that, reads more like a novel, modern novel, than it does like an ancient biography. But yes. Hello?
I'm already exhausted, Ashton, because first of all, this passage doesn't tell you anything about a backstory of a leper or what this individual went through or any of that stuff. So you just basically invented that out of whole cloth.
So I'm talking about
even if we had an entire chapter about the leper's miserable life, and then it was followed by these 4 verses that said Jesus healed him, that wouldn't mean that Jesus healed him, would it?
So maybe there's multiple times Jesus heals a
That was
leper,
a yes
but
or
I'm
no
thinking
question.
of this.
Okay. I don't care about the distractions, Ashton. This is about epistemology, about how do you know that a claim is true? And so in Matthew 8, verse 3, it says, Jesus put forth his hand and touched him, saying, I will, be thou clean. And immediately his leprosy was cleansed. What evidence do you have that that sentence accurately describes a real event that took place?
I would say the evidence I have is the other corroborating accounts in the other Gospels. If not in Matthew 8, I know in other Gospels, other places, the leper goes, he gets cleansed.
Let's say there are 23.
Let's say
there are 23 Gospels that all claim Jesus healed a leper.
Yeah.
Does that mean that Jesus healed a leper? That's just 23 claims. It's not the plural of anecdote is not data. It doesn't matter if 1 million people make the same claim. That's not 1 million quantitatively evidence that means we are reasonably warranted in believing that claim. And in your case, you don't have that. What you have are multiple anonymous accounts that you cannot source and cannot investigate. And the truth is, you're reading Matthew chapter 8, the first 4 verses, and you are just saying, I believe this. But you don't have any evidence. There's no empirical evidence for any of this. There is just a bunch of stories, and you believe the stories.
So I'm trying to make the argument from undesigned coincidences. that
No.
there's other accounts that fill in the gaps of this detail, and they read more like truthful
No,
testimony
Mark.
than
Or, sorry,
contrived
I'm
narrative.
going to
Ashton.
stop because you're ignoring me. Go ahead.
Ashton,
Yeah.
so yeah, you did ignore completely everything Matt said, but also just the argument you're giving doesn't work. You can't have corroboration when there's collusion. And you're aware that, so this is first told in Mark chapter 1, verses 40 to 45-ish. And Matthew picks it up. And you know that Matthew and Luke both pick this up, and you know that they both pick it up, and that they copy 90% of Mark has been copied into Matthew and Luke. We call that collusion, right? Because they've literally, that's their source. They copied it word for word in the Greek. So you cannot say that someone who copied my homework is corroboration of my homework. That's not how corroboration works. So I know that's a huge side tangent, but you're also just like, you're not thinking this through. These are not corroborating sources.
So I was
These are
trying to answer Matt's question that, like, what empirical evidence or data do we have to confirm any of what is in Matthew, other than the
you
fact
don't
that they're
have
just
corroboration.
stories?
Even if you had, Matt's point is excellent, was that even if you had 20 people corroborating, that would still be testimony, and that's a whole category of evidence that isn't going to work here. But you don't even have that, is, I guess, my weird side thing that I shouldn't have interjected, but you don't even have that.
So you say there's no corroboration, there's collusion because 90% is copied from Mark.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the unique elements in the other gospels.
No.
That fill in the gaps.
It's called verisimilitude. It's like you're adding details to the story, because the best way to tell a lie and have someone believe the lie is to include details that seem true, that you can literally make the argument you're just making. Well, yeah, why would I lie about going to 7-Eleven? And I went to 7-Eleven and I described which aisle the soda is in, and I got all that, and then there was a dragon in the corner. Well, I don't believe you're talking about the dragon, but I knew exactly where the soda was, so how do you not believe where the dragon was? Like, you understand how ridiculous that sounds from our side of things.
Yeah, and I think where the disconnect is I guess it's a whole other conversation too. I would say the reason it rings true is not the verisimilitude aspect. Is like when you made a comparison to like a dragon in the corner. To me, that includes like an element of like frivolity or like absurdity.
Do you understand
going back to like the original
do you understand
point,
that we think the healing is a frivolity?
Yes.
The healing itself is a frivolity, and so where I would disagree is like it's a core aspect of the story. It's not so like to go back to the example
dragon was a core aspect.
The dragon breathing fire is a core aspect of the story.
Well, I mean, if the story is I went to 7-Eleven, I came home, then the dragon detail is
okay. Ashton, if you're not even going to try, I don't know what to do. We're trying to get to.
Okay, well, I'll roll with it.
Stop talking for a second. The story about Jesus healing a leper exists in all three synoptic gospels. It's the beginning of Matthew, the beginning of Mark, and Luke chapter 5. And it is virtually the same and virtually word for word in all of those. Doesn't give the backstory, whatever else. But there are three gospels. You don't know who the author of any of those gospels are, do you?
I think it's reasonable to conclude that the authors of those gospels are the traditional authors that have been attributed to them. Like,
okay, then
I don't see any reason to doubt the traditional authorship.
You are in complete conflict with the overwhelming majority of New Testament scholars, because Matthew, Mark, and Luke are not signed gospels. The names attributed to them are a matter of tradition that is not accepted necessarily by New Testament scholars. So we don't have any reason to believe that these were actually written by eyewitnesses for many reasons, including the fact that eyewitnesses wouldn't have needed to copy off of each other or off of a shared source, whether it be the signed gospels or Q or whatever else. We don't know. So the reality is Nobody knows who the author of Matthew, Mark, or Luke are. And even if the names attributed to them represent the actual people who wrote them, that doesn't in any way mean that what they wrote is true. The consistency across there, especially when they're going word for word, is better explained by copying than by, oh, they all word for word said the same thing because it's true. Or maybe they had conversations, or maybe the oral tradition that they were running with, or the other text that they were looking at, maybe those things were in agreement. But all of that is separate to whether or not the story is true. When the Elvis biographies include Elvis's proposed abduction by aliens, if that's in 7 different Elvis books, that does not mean that we have 7 different sources attesting to the truth that Elvis was abducted by aliens. It means we have 7 different stories, 7 different sources that are telling the same story. And the truth of the story isn't in any way impacted by the number of books that tell it, how many people believe it, how strongly they believe it, whether they're willing to die for it. None of that tells us whether or not the story is true. And so if you're going to look at the rest of the context in the Gospels to try to support this, you don't just get to assume, well, healing someone of leprosy, that's just part of the story. That's the miracle that we're actually trying to confirm. What about when Jesus curses a fig tree? So the biblical story has Jesus coming across a fig tree that is not in season, doesn't have leaves, and when he doesn't find a fig on it, he curses it. What kind of all-knowing God, all-powerful being, can look at a tree that isn't bearing fruit when it's not supposed to be bearing fruit and curse it? I would say that's a miracle. If I go out and I curse a fig tree, that's not going to stop it from bearing fruit. It's not going to dry it up or anything. I would say that Jesus cursing the fig tree is also a miraculous claim, and it's a particularly stupid one, and it's also one that doesn't have any evidence that it happened. So getting back to the leper, we have 3 stories: Matthew 8, 1 through 4, Mark 1, 40 through 45, and Luke 5, like, I don't know, in the middle, 12 or something like that. And all 3 of those stories tell about Jesus healing a leper. I know the stories are there, and I know you think these were written by eyewitnesses or someone who knew an eyewitness or something like that. I don't think they were written by eyewitnesses, but I'll just say, even if they were written by people who claimed to be eyewitnesses, that would not convince me that Jesus actually healed a leper. If Jesus did in fact heal a leper, why isn't there better evidence than there are stories that sync up?
Well, I would say there isn't better evidence because it was the 1st century and it was before better forms of record keeping were available. So all people
I'm sorry.
had were.
Was Jesus God?
Yeah.
Does God have, is he nearly all powerful?
Yes.
Why can't God provide all of us right now rock solid evidence that Jesus healed a leper? Why do you have to make an excuse that this happened back in the 1st century when our record keeping wasn't as good? Why wouldn't God do it now? Why wouldn't God confirm it now? Why wouldn't God give us all evidence right now so that you didn't have to come in and look like you were just trying to advocate for a story that is preposterous? Is God punking you?
I would say that. Well, I would say that miracles. There's many instances of miracles that are way better documented that happen today as well.
Cool. Give me one.
So the case of Margaret Parit. No, sorry. Maurice Moreau. That's it. Maurice Moreau. There's a 60-minute documentary about how she was born. I don't know if she was born with a congenital defect, but she had some debilitating disease that left her handicapped. And only after visiting Our Lady of Lourdes and then having a religious experience
Our Lady of Lourdes?
was she I think she went to the Luch Shrine in France,
You
and
mean
then
Lord?
afterwards she had a religious experience and was healed and didn't need her brace anymore.
Matt's looking that
So
one up.
I know that one off the top of my head because there was a 60-minute special
That's
documentary
when I
on it.
when I
And it's a
Google that
medically
name,
documented.
I get a politician. I don't know who you get, Matt, but
Yeah,
Uh,
I'm
let
not
me
getting.
60 minutes.
But in any case,
60. Maybe I'm misremembering the name.
in any case, if someone went to Lord and prayed for a miracle and got healed, what's the evidence that they were actually sick, actually got healed, and how do you show that that healing was tied to God?
So how do you show that healing is tied to God? I would say in that case it's reasonable to conclude that God was involved because of the religious context of the healing.
No,
And because there's
No.
no other medically.
no, sorry. You don't get to pretend like you know everything about the universe and can rule out every naturalistic explanation and say, therefore, because it's in a religious context or because there's a Christophany, therefore that means that God did it. That's not how we establish causality. I'm wondering if you're talking about Sister
Well,
Bernadette
I agree
Moreau.
that correlation doesn't equate to causality, but I would say it's reasonable to assume, let's say, like you find a burglar in someone's home, man is dead on the floor, he has a smoking gun in his hand. You can't, like, in that instance, conclude that he did it. Maybe he burglarized the home, found the murder weapon, and picked it up when he was discovered by police. That's, also a possibility, but I would say an incredibly unlikely one when there's
See,
more self-evident.
every single thing that you listed as a possibility in that scenario is entirely naturalistic and is something for which we have mountains of evidence actually occurring. We know all about guns. We know how they're used. We all know all about murderers. We know all about burglars. You are appealing to a non-naturalistic explanation for which there isn't sufficient evidence and trying to put that. Why is it that when we talk about, can you demonstrate that Jesus healed a leper, we get nothing? And now that you're talking about maybe Sister Bernadette at Lourdes, despite the
Bernadette,
fact
that's
that,
it.
I found it. It's clear that you're
I was
advocating for
completely
Catholic
misremembering the
stuff
name.
because the Catholic Church finds miracles all the time and claims they're scientifically verifiable when nobody in science has ever demonstrated or acknowledged the demonstration of any miracle. Otherwise, they'd be getting a Nobel Prize for confirming a miracle. And then when we talk about reasonableness, you give an example that is entirely naturalistic. And you try to use that to say that your non-naturalistic explanation for this other thing is reasonable. That's not how reasonableness works. If you want to demonstrate that God is a reasonable, candidate explanation for anything, you need to demonstrate either directly that God exists, that he can and does interact with reality, and that he should be listed as a candidate explanation. You don't just get to say, as far as I know, it's scientifically impossible, and because this took place in a religious context, therefore it's reasonable to conclude God. That is probably, while I appreciated that it's a sincere and much more consistent attempt than most other people, it's just a patently absurd epistemology, and it's fallacious to argue that because science doesn't think something is possible, or because I don't think something is scientifically possible, or because I don't think something is naturalistically possible, therefore it's reasonable for me to conclude that a supernatural thing did it. That is fallacious. That is an argument from personal incredulity.
So I'm actually satisfied with that. I'm satisfied with your summary. Only thing I would say is I just don't think that's fallacious. To me, that's just reasonable.
I'm sorry,
Yeah, I
but
guess
it
I'll
is
just have to agree to
demonstrably
disagree.
fallacious.
Yeah.
It is fallacious to say that because I can't think of a natural explanation, I am warranted in accepting a supernatural one. That is literally a fallacy. The fact that you don't think so, I'm going to say
The
that's a defensive
fallacy of incredulity, right?
personal incredulity, that something is X because you can't
Personal
imagine it
incredulity.
being otherwise, or you can't accept it. It is a version of an argument from ignorance or an appeal to ignorance fallacy, because in an argument from ignorance fallacy, you're saying X is true until somebody proves me wrong. And what you're saying is it's reasonable for me to conclude God because there isn't an available alternative explanation. It is functionally, although not logically, identical in structure to an argument from ignorance fallacy.
So I don't think it's so you say it's functionally the same, but it's not identical to logical.
Which
It's
is
an
why I
argument
said
from
argument from personal incredulity,
ignorance.
and it's a variety of argument from ignorance.
It's a variety of arguments. So I don't think it's an argument from ignorance, because it's an argument from
No, you're
knowledge.
wrong.
Like, if we know how
And
science and the natural world
no,
works, then
no, we don't.
Mhm.
You don't know what is or isn't possible. You only know what science has demonstrated up to this moment, and you probably don't even know that. When cancers go into remission and nobody knows why, you could claim every one of them as a miracle for God, and nobody would ever be able to prove you wrong, because your model is unfalsifiable and untestable, which means it is unreasonable to accept it. You are wrong about whether or not it's a fallacy. You are wrong about what is reasonable.
so if I don't know what's possible about the world, that science can't tell me what's possible and what's impossible, then
Okay.
how can we say that any of the miracle claims in the Gospels are impossible?
We don't. We don't. And I think you'll find that neither
Okay.
Paul nor myself at any point in this conversation said those things are impossible. All we did was ask for what is the evidence to believe that they actually occurred. You not only have no way of demonstrating that they occurred, you have no demonstration that they are possible. It's not our job to prove they're impossible. It's your job to prove that they are possible and that they did happen, which you did not do. And now you're falling back on this pretend scenario of, well, we can't say they're impossible. Cool. I agree. We can't say they're impossible. Now, what do you got? What do you got after that?
So you can't say that it's impossible. I would just say that I would say that not only is it not impossible, I would say that it is a possibility as well,
Cool.
given.
Cool, Ashton. Let's say cool. It's possible. Possible. When it comes to someone telling you a story, has anyone ever told you a story and they were lying?
Yes. I mean, people lie all the time.
Okay. Has anyone ever told you a story that they believed to be true, but they were mistaken?
Yes.
Okay. Those things, you agree, happen some percentage of the time that's non-trivial, right? Some non-trivial amount of time. So
yes,
we've got stories. So even if we acknowledge, hey, miracles happen all the time, or not all the time, but they happen some of the time, and it was possible Jesus was doing this stuff. When you're coming to us with a story, and you've acknowledged that stories are frequently lies, and stories are frequently told by people who are mistaken, sincerely mistaken. So from my perspective, if I'm looking at this story and saying, boy, that sure seems less likely than someone's lying, and less likely that they were sincerely mistaken. And if you combine those two possibilities, man, this testimony alone for this miracle claim, I don't see how that should ever rise to me, even if I'm putting it in the category of possible. Like when I was a Christian, I doubted people's miracle claims all the time, because it's like, I think you might be mistaken about that. Like, we don't have to go to the point of saying that this was impossible for us to say the evidence you're bringing to us, because it's just a story. I've got to, if just statistically, I got to put into that category of mistaken or lying, right? Like, am I unreasonable about that epistemology?
Well, you said frequently people are mistaken or lying when giving testimony. Well, before you said it was non-trivial. It's like a non-trivial amount of time people are mistaken or lying when giving testimony. And so in this case, I would say that we could at least rule out the possibility that they were mistaken. I mean, if we grant everything in the story, the possibility that the people involved,
No,
the
because
leper himself,
because
the
as Matt
people who
said,
evaluated him,
we don't
were
know
just
we don't
mistaken
know
that
who
he was
wrote this
healed.
down, right? But hold on, we don't know who
Yeah.
wrote this down, so we have no
Well,
idea
I'll
if this
grant
is
that
a fifth
assumption,
hand.
but sure.
We don't know if this is
Yeah.
a fifth hand story, and so you can't tell me that the person who wrote this down has some kind of special way of knowing that this wasn't a sincerely mistaken person that spread this story to them. And certainly, like you're now talking about Luke and Mark, who you would agree were not witnesses, right? They were like, even if I grant you all that stuff, Luke got the story from Paul, who got it from who knows who, and Mark got it from Peter. So these are definitely not direct reports.
Mhm.
So we're this whole like sincerely mistaken. Just I'm asking about the epistemology. Do you understand that statistically it's less likely to be a miracle than to be mistaken or lying? And tell me if I'm wrong about that. Tell me why I'm wrong.
I would say in isolation, if all we had was the accounts in Matthew, without the surrounding gospel context, just some preacher in first century
No,
heal
we're
a
talking
leper.
about.
Great. I don't
They're talking about a whole. No, we're talking about the category of stories. Just category of stories.
just the category stories.
Any miracle story, any story with a miracle in it. For example, I'm assuming you don't think that Alexander the Great was the son of a goddess Artemis, right? You don't think that Alexander the Great was the okay. In his biographies, it says that he is the son of goddess Artemis.
Mhm.
So that's a story with a miracle in it, right? So, but you I assume are sitting there thinking, well, sometimes people lie and sometimes they're mistaken.
Okay, good. I mean, this is like where I was hoping to get to in the point of this call. So I'm glad we got here. So, why I just don't think that's a fair comparison because of just
Okay, so
the
you're
amount
special
of
pleading. You're just to be clear, you're special pleading
special
your
pleading.
category of miracle story. You're not answering my question about general You're refusing to answer my question
Okay,
about
so
general
let's
miracle
circle back.
stories.
Yeah, so the question about
General.
stories in general, how can we verify? The question is, how can we verify the accounts in stories in general? The account from just a category of
No,
stories.
the question. No,
And I
no.
think
The question is.
Hmm?
The question is, in any story with a miracle in it, are we not sane in thinking that it's more likely to be a lie or a mistake? Forget it, just in general.
Isn't a miracle
in general,
by definition, improbable and therefore less likely than a claim of a miracle that isn't true?
I would say yes, because it's by nature miraculous, so it's improbable. That's what a miracle
So
is.
given
I would
that the
say.
default position for a miracle claim would be to lean towards it's unlikely or less likely than it actually occurred, then clearly we need an evidentiary warrant to meet the burden of proof that shows us that a particular miracle claim is probable.
Mhm.
Okay.
I mean, sure.
And the category
So-
of testimony or stories can't overcome that burden just by the nature of it. Like, I don't, you're special pleading yours, but do you understand where we're walking to from our perspective? Just this category of it's a story has this built-in flaw that can't be overcome by you or anyone else.
Okay, I follow that. So there must be a different kind of evidence other than testimony if it's less likely to be a possibility that. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So do you have anything other than the testimony in Matthew, Mark, and Luke of this story, which is copied verbatim, which may actually, in fact, be one instance just copied 3 times, but we'll just assume it's 3 separate ones that happen to use the exact same words. That's all testimony. Do you have anything beyond the testimony is the question that we had a while ago.
Yeah. So I would say, um, I would say just the type of testimony involved.
No,
I would say is different from the kind
Ashton,
of
we should
testimony we get.
Ashton, we should stop. When the question is, do you have
Okay.
anything other than testimony? And your answer is
Do
yes.
you have
The
anything?
type
So
of
I
testimony.
brought up.
Why are you talking over me? I paused because I'm trying to save you from embarrassing yourself. When you're asked if you have something other than testimony and you say yes, and the thing that you give that's other than testimony is the type of testimony, you're done.
Okay. Well, yeah. I mean, obviously, in this specific instance, all we have is testimony.
Okay.
But I would say that we also have, like I mentioned, other miracle claims to suggest that our understanding of the world,
Here's the thing.
especially regarding like extraordinary claims, is limited.
Does the number of miracle claims make any particular miracle claim more or less likely?
I would say it makes it more likely if it's something that
Why?
we observe regularly.
Why?
Well, because
when somebody lies habitually, does that make any of their lies more or less likely to be true?
less likely.
Okay. So for a lie, you go with less likely. But for a miracle, which you've already acknowledged is less probable than its actual, that a lie is more probable than its actual occurrence, all of a sudden you switch to saying it increases it. You have a completely inconsistent epistemological foundation here where you are treating claims that you accept different from claims that you don't accept.
So, the point I was making there, you asked like if does more miracle claims make it more or less likely that the miracle claims in the gospel are true? I would say like beyond just claims, like if we grant that those claims are true, like let's say we do observe miracles, that makes the claims in the gospel less extraordinary and therefore more likely.
Does the claim that Alexander
going.
the Great does the claim that Alexander the Great is the son of the goddess Artemis make Jesus more likely to be the son of God?
No.
Is it
Why
more
not?
likely?
The claim that Jesus healed a leper. Yeah. Oh, you want me to go ahead? Okay. I was just going to say, like, the claim that Jesus healed a leper, that a man was healed miraculously of his leprosy after a religious experience, is less likely in the context of Sister Bernadette being healed from Our Lady of Lourdes. That's the claim I'm making. When it comes to is Alexander the Great
to demonstrate
the son?
They're like they are. You think that they're not alike, but they are identically alike. That both. I gave you two examples of Son of Divinity miracles, and you said epistemologically that they don't affect each other. And now you're giving healing miracles, and you think that they're different, and you think that it somehow is a different category. So this is what's frustrating me and Matt, is that you don't seem to be coming along with us on the journey and taking a step back outside of yourself and the thing you wanted to talk about and see how an outsider sees it. You need to have an outsider test to be able to take yourself out of what you...
So I was just like the miracle of Jesus being the Son of God.
Sorry,
stop.
That's fair now.
The thing that's frustrating is that I spent some time here outlining an actual serious flaw in your epistemology, and your response was to say, the point I was trying to make was, I've reached my limit for people ignoring whatever the fuck I say just so they can say the next thing in their script or preference. You are welcome to call back another time, Ashton. You are welcome to think about this and come back with better evidence, but you have exhausted me with your inability to acknowledge the shit that I'm saying while you go on with your script for the day. So thanks.
All right, goodbye.
And my apologies, Matt, if I enabled that in some way.
No. We were both trying for the same thing, but I mean, it's it's frustrating to be sitting here and getting honest. I'll talk to Ashton anytime, but I mean, it's 45 minutes we've been on the phone. And like we said, we'll go on for a long time as long as somebody's honestly answering. And Ashton, while it was sometimes difficult prying him in particular directions, would at least come far enough to where we were able to show, I think, the difference between the sort of epistemological thinking that you and I are going to do on hearing a miracle claim and what Ashton's doing on hearing a miracle claim. And there's a number of blatant inconsistencies in his model, not the least of which is taking the ones from the Bible and treating them as a different category to other claims, and taking claims that aren't in the Bible, but are consistent with his biblical model of some sister getting healed at the, Our Lady of Lourdes or whatever. And that being presented as if it adds affirmation. It reminds me very much of something that literally happened in my most recent debate, which I did on Good Friday, with Dan Christopoulos in Tampa, Florida, because during the Q&A session, he brought up the miracle of Marlene Klebs, I don't know, saying that this miracle, because it was accompanied by a Christophany, an apparent appearance of Christ, that it actually added credibility to the claim of a resurrection, which is just monumentally flawed epistemology. Two completely separate claims that are tied in a conclusion you've reached about them does not mean that one is supportive of the other, especially when you have no reason to think that either of them are true. And when I was presented the PDF files that this Marlene story was based on, and went and did research, it turns out that story is ridiculous for any reasonable person to think that Marlene actually was miraculously healed. But even if you manage to stretch to the point where you think the healing was miraculous, there is zero evidence to support it, and no evidence anywhere in the universe that we can tell that says she was healed because of God. And it certainly doesn't mean that Marlene is confirmation of the resurrection. It is a bizarre set of apologetics. And by the way, this isn't me picking on Than, although, I will. I mean, Than knows what I think, but also the other individuals who were there. I had a long conversation with the guy that put this together, and they are trying to create, I kid you not, I'm not going to give too many details of the discussion because we'll see what happens, but they as a team are trying to create an epistemological foundation that demonstrates the power of a Christophany, of an apparent appearance of Christ. So that if there's a healing that is accompanied by a claim of a Christophany, they lend more credence to that. Just right out of the gate. If you're healed and you say that it was accompanied by some experience of God, that automatically for them gives that claim more credence.
Wow.
This is a raw demonstration of an open bias, that because you're already convinced of the claims of the resurrection and convinced of the claims of Jesus, that when someone cites that for something else which has not been demonstrated, that becomes more plausible. I did an entire video on my channel going through this in detail. It's probably the most research I've done on, most of the videos I spend a lot of time thinking about and having conversations with myself and other people. And I get my thoughts kind of together, and I'm like, boom, I've got a list of probably 25 topics where it's like, I'm still thinking. And then boom, I'm going to sit down. I'm going to record something between 8 and 25 to 30 minutes. Almost all of mine are done with no cuts, facing the camera like this. They are with scattered notes because I sit around thinking about these things, obsessing about them until I'm just comfortable talking about them off the top of my head. This is one that I didn't do like that.
You brought the receipts on this one. I love that video from you. Yeah, you brought it.
And it's kind of sad that, I wish there was a better reason to believe it. All right, we got other callers. Let me make the announcements real quick before we get on to the other callers as well. You're watching the Sunday Show After Dark with myself and Paulogia, and whoever happens to call in so far. Really good conversations, and we're looking forward to more, especially from theists. Theists will always have priority here. But also, if you have some supernatural belief that you'd like to defend, we'll give you priority as well. If you have some pseudoscientific belief or whatever else, you might want to consider calling into Skeptalk, which is Mondays at 6 p.m. Tomorrow's Skeptalk is going to be John Gleason and Aron Ra. And then on Tuesday's Chewed Gum, it's going to be Eve and Alyssa. On Wednesday, I'll be here on the Hang Up with, I see it typed in there, so I'm going to assume that it's all confirmed and locked in, Andrew Seidel. Perfect time to get him in to talk about Chevron and the assassination attempt and the Heritage Foundation and Project 2025. We might just have like a 19-hour show Wednesday night, so be prepared with your questions. Thursday's Transatlantic Call-In Show. If you are transphobic or if you've been called transphobic and you're either ashamed of it or proud of it or want clarification, you want to be a better ally or you want to understand this stuff or you desperately want for trans people to just shut their fucking pie hole, you can tune into Transatlantic Call-In Show. This week it's Josie and Luxander, but you can also call in and talk to actual trans people to get better educated and understand things, hopefully, from their perspective as well. Next Sunday show at 2 p.m. is going to be Jimmy Snow and Eve. And the Sunday show after dark, I'll be back with Eric from Skeptics and Scoundrels. Paul, you got anything we got to get to or announce before I
go
on to the next?
I'm excited about callers.
Sweet. So we have calling from Argentina, Juan. Welcome, Juan. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and pretend that Juan didn't just do that. Because Juan called in and said, do you have a basis for morality without stealing from the Christian ethic and worldview? And so I'm going to treat Juan with vastly more respect and consideration than that guy did for us. So when you ask, do I have a foundation for morality without stealing from the Christian worldview? Here we go. I have a foundation for morality that I tend to describe as well-being of thinking creatures. It's in alignment with Sam Harris's book, The Moral Landscape, which came out after I gave my talk on the superiority of secular morality. I'm not remotely saying that Sam stole anything from me. I'm saying we were talking about the same ideas at the same time, and I preferred his language. I preferred his well-being of thinking creatures language. Whether you consider that a foundation for morality or not, I do. And if you care about the well-being of thinking creatures, then you care about my morality model, even if you don't consider it morality. If you have some other definition of morality, I'm happy to discuss it. But if your morality is, hey, whatever God says, I'm not interested in that because I don't see any evidence there's a God or any reason why I should care what a God thinks. But the question being framed with, can you do this without stealing from a Christian worldview, is an incredibly dishonest framing. So it's not surprising that when we went live, what we got was some music playing rather than anything of any substance that would show that there was any sort of thoughtful mind behind this. When you say, can you do it without stealing from the Christian worldview? That's incredibly dishonest because first of all, Christianity is stealing from Judaism. And second of all attempts at a moral foundation and framework are going to have similarities. You don't get to claim that an earlier version, because it has pieces A, B, and C, is somehow the owner or proprietor of those, and any other system that also includes A, B, and C either stole from that system and then massaged it or manipulated it separately. Because it could be that in the investigation of the consideration of how best should we act to create a better world, that individuals are going to come up with similar answers. Because we are similar beings with similar minds facing similar problems trying to answer the question. It's like saying that if two people invented the wheel on opposite sides of the world, neither of them stole anything from either of them. But even if somebody had seen an idea and borrowed from it and they came up with a better wheel, their wheel would still be better. My morality is superior to Christianity, and it's superior to Judaism, and it's superior to Islam, and it is superior to every religious model I know, and I can demonstrate that really easily. As I've said before, I can write a better book than the Bible, and I can prove it to you and everybody else right now, because I could rewrite the Bible word for word, reverse its position on slavery, and the book would be better, period. That's not even up for debate. But the fact that Christianity and Judaism and Islam and any of these other religions have a supposedly static moral system, in truth, you guys reinterpret and massage based on the influence from secularists. So you're stealing from our worldview to soften yours, because none of you are sticking with what the Holy Book actually originally said, or you'd have slaves and you'd be killing people for working on the Sabbath. See, the secular community is looking around saying, how do we get better at this? And so we build a moral system. And even if it has some ideas that are similar to yours, like you probably think thou shalt not murder, and I think thou shalt not murder. Yay! Did I steal that from Christianity? No, it's called empathy. And if you and your religion exercised more empathy and explored more, you would be able to reform your religion so that it's almost as good as humanism. But instead, you decide to be snarky. So I just owned you, clobbered you, owned you like a slave, but I free you now. You are now free to go out into the world and make your morality half as good as mine if you really try. Thanks, Juan. Siobhan's been on hold for ages. My apologies. Siobhan from Missouri, pronouns are she, they. You want to say something about determinism and rehabilitative justice. So welcome to the show. Thank you for your patience.
Hi, thank you for having me on. I guess I was hoping for what I call a sanity check. It's something I've been thinking about lately, and I wanted to see if maybe some people who, in my opinion, are maybe smarter than I am, can tell me if there are flaws in this idea that I can't see. But yeah, I've had a couple of conversations lately about the ramifications of like determinism, which I know you're 100% familiar with all that, but the question came up that like, how are we supposed to do like crime and punishment if there is no other way that a person could have acted in a given situation? And my answer to that is that the human brain is a learning machine. So if like, even if in a world where everything is 100% deterministic, and if that were the case, I can't imagine a stronger argument than for rehabilitative justice, because it means that like the only appropriate thing to do potentially is to try and teach people how not to do crimes. I don't know if I'm making sense there.
No. I prefer rehabilitative justice, and incarceration is both an opportunity to strive for rehabilitative justice, or at a minimum, if we fail, to keep other people safe from that individual doing more harm to others.
Right. Yeah, the argument I was having was like, well, can you even hold people accountable if that were the case? And my counter argument was just that, like, yes, you can and you should, because like it's our responsibility as a society then to help people like not, learn how to be better.
So
Yeah.
one, all I was gonna say is that even if let's say we're not, there isn't justification, as Matt was saying, for some kind of punitive or even rehabilitative, right? Justice in terms of this sense, and that's people want that eye for an eye, right? They viscerally feel like their intuition tells them that we can have retribution.
Yeah, it's
even
emotionally
if we can't,
satisfying, but yeah,
right. And it's also a good, like someone like Frank Turek. Well, like it's just the intuition that in the crowd, well, yes, justice should be served. And we don't like it if, like, what if Hitler doesn't ever feel any kind of pain that is somehow proportional to the pain that he caused, or anyone, right? Then that feels unsatisfying to us, but that doesn't mean anything at all. We definitely, though, we would have the right as a society to continue to protect society from individuals who, even if we decided it was through nothing of their own volition, but they were still harming people, it would just make sense for us as a society to wall them off and to do, at least take some level of measure to keep them from increasing their harm, right? So that level makes sense. And as you said, it absolutely makes sense to try to correct people's behavior, right? And to teach. We can all be better. And so for some people, they got a long way to go. Those two things make sense. The trouble is, I think, the determinism doesn't endorse revenge punishment, and I won't speak for Matt, but I'm not a big fan of the revenge punishment. I don't think it works, and I don't think it's helpful. I think that the Western justice system has a long way to go to be effective on a lot of things, and I don't think that's a controversial statement.
You're speaking
but
for me.
Oh, okay. Very good. Very good. So, but I think people want to play, just like the morality question that Matt just answered, people always want to play to intuition on that. I feel like people want to play to intuition on this justice thing. And what they really mean is revenge. And they don't like
Yeah.
it if you're trying to tell them that they don't have good justification for wanting revenge. But I don't think they do. I don't think that, you asked about smarter opinions than you. I'm definitely still a newbie to all this, and there's probably people in the chat, and definitely Matt. But that's just, I've given this a lot of thought too, and I just feel like my old eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth notions don't actually survive determinism. So if that's the conclusion, probably is right.
Right. Yeah. If my ideal world would be one in which people choose to do the right thing of their own volition, and just don't do like violence and things in the first place. And getting revenge on people does absolutely nothing to help make that happen, as we've seen in states like Texas, where the use of capital punishment does not seem to do anything to prevent crime from happening in the first place.
And just to be clear, I'm not talking now about deterrence, because obviously there are things that we do to deter, to give people that extra incentive, and that would be a separate category, just lest anyone want to jump on me on that.
Okay. Well, it sounds like we're in agreement. So thank you all for having the conversation. That has been really nice. Thank you.
Thanks, Sivan.
Okie doke. Thank you so much, Sean. Yeah, I'm the criminal justice system is broken. I don't think anybody's going to say it's not. I think even the people who are kind of keen on a prison industrial complex and incarcerating as many people as possible, and even the people who are using it for potential labor and all that, I think almost all of them would agree that there's something fundamentally not quite right about the criminal justice system. And yet I think most of us would agree that at its heart, what it's supposed to be and what we strive for it to be is a good thing. Some people look at it as punishment, like, oh, you did the crime, now you're doing your time, as if that's a way for paying for something. I tend to think incarceration is usually a bad thing, because you are inhibiting somebody from making proper amends for things. I'd be much happier in many cases with something like, house arrest or limited, function. You still get to go to work and everything else, but I don't even know. I'm not here to make suggestions on how to fix it. But if we had the goal of taking the people who are dangerous to themselves and others and making it so that they're no longer dangerous to themselves or others, that should be priority number one. And one of the ways to do that is to keep someone incarcerated, but to work on rehabilitation and trying to avoid recidivism. Now, I'm not remotely an expert on the hows and whys. And you know what? Something came up a couple times today, so I'll just say it. Some people need to die. Now, I don't mean that in the sense of I'm okay with the death penalty or let's run around killing people or anything else. I was listening to old Jane's Addiction album, and so I think it's in Pigs and Zen. Perry says, some people must die, or some people must die. That's just unconscious knowledge. And then today on Facebook, somebody was like, if you don't think some people just need to die or deserve to die, you're not paying attention. I understand those sentiments. I don't fully agree with them. I think when I say some people are going to need to die, that we're going to have to wait for a generation to die off to change some things. And I'm not trying to shuffle them off the mortal coil any faster. I'm just saying that right now, the broader zeitgeist of humanity is still not where it needs to be on reforming the criminal justice system, and we need to wait for a generation to die off. We also need to make sure that the younger generations coming up don't do what so many of us have done before, which is turn into our fucking parents. Once you have kids, you'll change. And some people do. Well, once you have money, you'll change. And some people do. I don't know, because I don't have kids or money. So maybe that's why I'm stuck where I've been for 20 years or whatever. But all right, we got a couple other calls real quick. This one is for me, so my apologies to everybody, but AJ from Canada, pronouns are him, has a question for me.
Hey, how are you?
I'm doing all right. How are you?
Not too bad. Yeah, been thinking about calling the show for a while. So, yeah, my question for you is, when you were a theist, Matt, how did you come to terms with, the stuff you hate about the Bible now? Like, you must have known about it then. So, like, I just kind of want to get to know you better because I kind of respect your opinions on a lot of things. So, yeah, let you go now.
Well, so I had kind of the same rationalizations and views that some of the callers do, and some of the bad arguments, which is how I got involved in kind of creating videos that counter some of those arguments. So for me, like, I remember standing around with 4 different apologists trying to explain and justify what the Bible says about slavery 4 different ways. At least 1 or 2 of those were ways that I also justified it while I was there. Well, it's indentured servitude. It's not this. Or, everybody had to go free in the year of Jubilee. And it was just, the biggest issue was believing that there was a God who was good. And that means that whatever the Bible says, if it seems immoral, if it seems bad, that's my problem because I'm a fallen creature. God has given us over to a reprobate mind. And because I'm fallen and I can't understand it, I'm going to look at this and say, ooh, that doesn't seem right. But God is morally perfect and knows and sees better than all of us. And therefore, even though it seems wrong to me now, it must be right. And I should keep trying to find a way to understand how it's right. But if I never do, I should just accept that God knows more and is wiser than me. That was basically the line.
Can I ask you a follow-up question to that?
Sorry, what?
Can I ask you a follow-up question to directly what you just said?
Yeah, sure.
Basically, you just said God is better than me, he knows more than me. So how did you come to terms with the fact that, fuck him, I'm better than him, I have more moral standards than him? I've been listening to you for the past hour or so, being on hold, so you do have better moral standards than that motherfucker. No offense to him, if he exists, which we don't need to get into that.
You just answered your own question. Once I, well, first of all, at some point I realized I didn't have any reason to think there was a God, whether it was moral or not. But, and I genuinely don't know what came first. I don't know if I think on some level I realized that it's possible that God might exist and yet not be morally perfect, that there may be some being there that could punish me or has thoughts, and yet we don't fully know or understand it. And so maybe we were wrong about thinking God was morally perfect, and maybe he's evil. Then the other possibility is maybe that God doesn't exist. And what I'm reading are man's best attempt to describe what they think God would want. Once those two became real possibilities, and I became convinced that I cared more about what was true than what was comforting or comfortable or taught to me, all of it started. I mean, it took a while for stuff to fall away, but everything started falling down there. And once I realized that what the Bible's advocating for in many cases is grossly immoral, and that a fairly simple individual could flatly see that there was a problem here, it became obvious that there just wasn't a good God behind any of this stuff. that you want to ask what's wrong with slavery. Why don't you ask the slaves?
Oh, no, I don't need to ask that question. There's many things wrong with it. So
I wasn't saying you. I was answering.
Kind of, no, thank you for that. I appreciate it. I've been listening to you for a while. So, and Paul, you come up on my YouTube feed a lot too. So, hey, how are you? I hope you're well.
I'm good, AJ. Thank you.
Yeah.
The only thing, AJ, what I would add is if I ever become a Christian again, if I ever become convinced that Jesus did, like the historical arguments all of a sudden line up.
Can I cut in right now? Can I cut in right now? I want to cut in. I'm going to cut in. I'm going to agree with you on what you're going to say because. Oh my God!
Never mind. Goodbye.
No. You don't know what I'm going to say. What I'm going to say is that I will just decide that God's definition of morality isn't well-being and reduction of harm. That God, when he talks about morality, if it was real, the God of the Bible, what they talk about isn't compatible with what matter I now define morality as. So that's how I would square that if were I to become a Christian again. That like God is somehow just like does not care about actually what happens to us in this finite life, and that that's where I would just have to go if I was to become convinced. That's all.
I already dropped him. I've done this show twice today. Not in the mood for somebody who's going to just ignore us and try to steamroll over to interject to claim that they know what's being said. Anyway, one important kind of caveat to all that is that I don't know. I suspect Paul and I don't get to hang out very often. We don't live near each other. We do shows together. Paul knows how much I respect and admire him, but we haven't discussed everything. There may be things where Paul and I disagree on the moral assessment of an issue. And you know what? I would think we're both, even in our disagreement, still superior to where we were when we were believers. Mm-hmm. And that the process of us sorting out which one of us is more likely to be correct works completely differently when you have two individuals that value secular foundations of ethics and value reason and evidence in making a case for something rather than appealing to an authority. Any area where Paul and I disagree is much easier to address and tackle than it would be if either of us were appealing to our own God. But we got two more calls on the show tonight that we're going to take real quick. Matthew in Texas, pronouns are he, him, has a question about the Talmud Jesus.
Ooh. Yes, this is for Paul.
Okay,
good.
First of all, Paul, I read on Google that you are 53 years old. Is that true? And if so, what the heck are you drinking?
I drink coffee, and that's sure. I always have to do the math. I'm so old that I have to figure out what year I was born. So 71 sounds about right.
That's amazing. That's amazing. So yeah,
my little brother.
My question is, could the Jesus in the Talmud be the historical Jesus? I know you touched a lot on Tacitus and Lucian and Pliny the Younger, which I don't feel are very reliable. I looked at all of Gary Habermas's, like 39 ancient sources, and they all fall apart pretty easily, except seemingly the Talmud. And I was wondering what your thoughts are on that, and if the historical Jesus could be the Talmud Jesus.
So here's the thing. The name Jesus, like Josephus mentions 12 different people named Jesus or Yeshua, right? And I hate being the guy who's saying Yeshua because that's a very pretentious thing for me to do when I'm not qualified to be speaking in those kind of tongues. But just like there's so many Jameses and something, I just don't think that the Talmud Jesus, I don't see a strong reason to think that while that probably was a historical figure, that it's the same historical figure that kicked off Christianity. I'm honestly, for what little, there's very little information. Sure, we could speculate, but it's no different than saying, hey, there's a guy named, it's just a common first name. And so I think it's pretty tenuous, and I wouldn't hang any kind of hats on that. That's just me personally.
Is there a particular reason, like, well, this Jesus did this, and this doesn't match up here? Is there a specific reason, or?
So I actually think, I think that there's great evidence that I think it's very reasonable to think, because Christianity started with John the Baptist and ended with apocalyptic teaching, that the thing between those two endpoints that we can know was an apocalyptic preacher, and the Talmud Jesus. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but the Talmud Jesus, there was no apocalyptic element to that figure, and I just don't think it makes sense for the Jesus movement to be apocalyptic, the John the Baptist movement to be apocalyptic, and for there to be some other flavor of something else in between. So that's not super strong, but that's my gut.
Yeah, it seems like they have a lot in common. I mean, they both had the same name. They both had disciples. They both did sorcery. They both led Israel astray. They were judged by the Jews. No witnesses came forward to defend them. They both were crucified. They were both killed on the eve of Passover, and their disciples were executed afterwards. So, what do you think about that?
I don't think we can know all that about both figures. So but you've now exhausted what I can confidently say, because I'm definitely in Dunning-Kruger land on this. So I'm going to defer, and you should definitely find a Jewish rabbi type show, or go to Dr. Kip Davis, who studies that kind of stuff a lot, and they will be able to more confidently speak. I've only looked into it cursorily, so I don't want to represent that I've done more study on it than I have. Is that fair?
I got. Yeah.
I know that Ehrman has spoken on this before. He's not necessarily the first reference that I go to, but yeah, I know he's mentioned it before. I think part of it is that the Talmud references are later, but we are out of my depth as far as, like, you want to go into Bible stuff, I'm there. You want to go into Talmud stuff, I'm definitely not the guy to do anything more than a cursory thing. So it was smart of you to say this is for Paul. So I suspect you already knew that I wasn't the person to ask. So good job.
Yeah. It seems like on. Oh, sorry.
All I was going to say was it's a great question. I actually have heard Bart talk about it, and that's largely where I'm getting my information from. In
Richard Carrier's book, on page 283 of Dr. Richard Carrier's 2014 book on the historicity of Jesus, he seems to acknowledge that this Jesus could be the historical Jesus. I'm not sure. Don't quote me on that, but page 283.
Don't quote you on it. And you're giving out page numbers in one of the biggest books I own, and you're like, "Don't quote me on it." You show off. Flex some more.
Richard Carrier also definitely plays devil's advocate with a lot of the Talmud stuff, and I am aware of people who speak Hebrew who very strongly disagree with Richard Carrier, who doesn't speak Hebrew. I respect Richard Carrier as well, so I don't want to. But when it comes, he doesn't speak the language, and so I'm going to defer to some of the other scholars I know who do speak the language, and that's where they live and breathe when they disagree. So I would encourage you to check.
I think Godless Engineer has the best video on this, on the Talmud, but it seems, and I really love him, but it seems like it's sort of like trying to have it both ways. It's saying, the Gospels are unreliable. Their mythology, but on the other hand, it's like, the Jesus mentioned in the Talmud can't be the historical Jesus because of the things in the Gospels. You see what I mean? So, but in my mind, I'm thinking, in my mind,
you didn't hear me do that. Yeah, go ahead.
And it's like, and it made me think. I was like, well, if the Gospels are mythology, then maybe the Talmud Jesus, which was 100 years before, could have inspired some of what the Gospels said. Does that make sense? It seems like no one's really ever talked about that.
I also want to caution you on that. Talmud was 100 years before. Most of the Talmud was written way later, representing teaching from before. So
yes,
unless you're
yes.
actually talking about Dead Sea Scrolls, like and it's important when you're trying to argue this kind of stuff just to be precise about that stuff. So all I would say is, hey, look up some scholars who, like, I'm thinking Dr. Joshua Bowen, Dr.
Yeah.
Kip Davis, other people, Tabor, like a lot of people who actually, speak Hebrew, study the Hebrew Bible for what it is, and the rest of us are just kind of guessing. So I would point you that way to round out your position.
Gotcha. And I made a mistake. I meant to say that according to the Talmud, Jesus lived in like 130 BC. That's what I meant to say. So I know that
Right,
the
yeah.
Talmud was written later, but the Jesus they talk about in it lived 100 years before. So I correct myself on that. So
Okay.
I think the earliest
Thanks, Matthew.
Talmud. Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
J Mike's in chat. Boy. Thanks, Matthew. J Mike, type in when you're going to be on the show next. You're over there in chat. I saw you. Ha ha ha. Ha 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 ha. And how was the pinball? What's going on? That's more important than anything. We're actually just got. No, I'm kidding. All right. We have 2 calls left. And both are kind of interesting questions from atheists. So Kevin from Japan, pronouns are he, him. What question have you got for us today, Kevin? Thank you for calling.
Hi. Yeah. I recently, last year or so, have like deconstructed from Christianity. And there's a lot of things with the faith that were relatively easy to let go of. Like I'd long since gotten rid of the idea of there being a hell or like sin being a problem. But
Sure.
one thing that is still stuck with me is kind of the magical thinking that comes along with belief in prayer. So, like, even outside of the faith, still kind of not finding it difficult to motivate myself to kind of take the initiative to address problems, deal with issues, because I still find myself thinking, well, it'll get solved eventually, or something will happen. It'll work itself out. So going from God will take care of it to, it'll figure itself out somehow. And
Kevin,
I'm
why are you attacking me?
seeing that. Trying not to.
Yeah, no. I say that because I don't engage in much in the way of magical thinking at all anymore. And yet there are still plenty of times where, just as a pragmatic sort of optimism, it is more like I've got 500 things going on and potentially going wrong, and I need to prioritize them. And so the triage process for me doesn't really involve, magical thinking like, oh, God will take care of this, or this will sort itself out, or whatever else. It's let me work on and fix the things I can right now, and everything else gets pushed out, which means I guarantee you, if I were to take the list, there's more stuff to fix or change or do on my list than I could possibly do in my lifetime. And there's some things that they just keep moving down the list because there's always something new. We're in a new world. I mean, who'd have thought? I'm sitting here, I'm 55. I've been doing this for 20 years. I didn't know that, I was going to end up doing a triple bypass and having to change things about my life, or I'm getting ready to go to have oral surgery. So there are physical things that impact me, but also there's financial things, and there are relationship things. And it is just, I don't even think it's fair to call it magical thinking to say, let me focus on the thing I can fix right now. And I'm just going to have confidence that the rest of it isn't, not that it's going to fix itself, but isn't going to blow up and become priority one while I'm working on the thing that's currently priority one. And you're going to get it wrong on occasion. If you are, in fact, pushing issues off, I'm king of procrastinating in that way, but if you're pushing issues off because somewhere in the back of your head, it's part of the plan, or God's got a plan, or, if you're genuinely thinking that, hey, I'm just going to keep ignoring that bill and somehow the money is going to fall into my lap type of thing. Because when you were a believer, when I was a believer, when something like that would happen, it was praise God. You watch the debate that I did with Mike Lacono, where he talks about a church that prayed and they got exactly the amount of money that they prayed. Those stories, if I had a dime for every one of those stories, I'd be richer than anybody in those stories from the money that they got. I'd be richer than all of them put together. And so if you're doing that, then by the way, first of all, cut yourself some slack. You are working your way out of years of training your mind to work one way. And just remember that you being conscious constantly that you're likely to do something like that is how you make sure that you work as a check valve for yourself. And if you can't be your own check valve, get somebody who's a good friend, a partner, somebody who will call you out on your shit, and then listen to them, because they're doing it because they care and they're doing it to try to be helpful, and you'll get there eventually.
And Kevin, may I add?
I can't disagree.
May I add that procrastination can sometimes be a precursor warning signs for other chemical imbalance and other type of mental health issues. So if you, now that you are conscious of it and that you are going to like have accountability partners, from my old language, if you're gonna have people enlisted, and if you can't sort of by your own bootstraps kind of a thing, don't necessarily feel defeated. That might be a reason to talk to someone like from a secular therapy project or something. I'm not saying it's now, but keep an eye on it down the road, that if this becomes just sort of a persistent thing, and I'm not a therapist and I do anything, I just have people in my life who procrastination was a starting warning sign for other issues. So don't let that fester too long. If in fact and it might have been something that you were treating, as it were, with religion, as a lot of us do. It's that crutch that helps us through a lot of things. So if that persists, maybe consider that as well. That's not a first. It's not a first response, but maybe something to consider down the road if your friends who are you're going to enlist to help you with this aren't enough.
Yeah, and like you said, talking with friends, having someone to hold me accountable is definitely kind of the most immediate advice. And procrastination is a thing I am talking about with my therapist. So,
awesome, very good.
It's not. But yeah, like I just had been kind of seeing that connection between my previous beliefs and current behaviors, and wondering if other people dealt with the same thing, and just
I was nodding.
If there was any,
I was nodding along with
thought.
everything you were saying, and it sounds like Matt was too. Like absolutely, your experience mirrors mine immensely. Let me just say that I relate very much to that, and I'm not out of it myself. So I find myself wishing that I could pray about this problem, because man, doing it myself seems hard. So even now. So you're in good company, at least.
Okay. Well, sounds like it's just something I need to just keep working on, and will always be a journey.
Dude, give yourself time.
Yeah, that was my question.
I'm not picking on you in the slightest. Kevin here, just this is encouraging. I can see in Call-In Studio, anytime somebody's called in and what they called in about and everything else, and it's like 2 weeks ago you called in and identified as a theist wanting to present the ontological argument, and now you're calling as an atheist talking about getting over magical thinking. It is.
I will say, I do think this is a. Sorry, I think might be an issue with Call-In Studio. I have called before.
Sorry, what?
I haven't called in before, or I haven't actually been on the show before, and I didn't call in to talk about the ontological argument. I think I'm calling in over Skype. I don't have an American phone number, so that's why I think sometimes it might
I bet
overlap
Colin
with other
Studio,
cults.
my apologies then, because I think what Colin Studio is doing is
Yeah.
is recognizing a generalized Skype number and telling me that you've called 34 times. So
Yeah.
let me
Yeah.
ignore everything I just said, except for this, what the advice that I was giving earlier, and this statement, which is give yourself time. You don't have to have confidence or faith or magical thinking to think that time will, in fact, improve things. The evidence tends to show that as people find their way out of religions, time is beneficial, that things improve over time. Even some of the people who went through the worst of stuff or had to deal with stuff that was traumatic, it's time heals all wounds, and it's a truism for a reason. I can't predict. Your life could turn to shit tomorrow and just be awful. You might even find a new religion and get sucked into it, but trust yourself and give yourself time, and I think you'll be fine.
Okay. I appreciate the advice, guys.
Cool. Thanks, Kevin. We have one more call for tonight. You ready?
Excellent. I'm ready.
Ryan in Pennsylvania, pronouns he, him, wants to ask a question. Is this show or your other content more successful in conversions? What other content, Ryan? And who are you talking to? Both of us? Each of us? Hello? Ryan, if you called in on your phone has probably gone to sleep. And so you need to wake your phone up so that you're...
Oh, am I on?
You're on now, yeah.
Okay. Sorry about that. Yeah, howdy guys. I'm a huge fan of both of your work, whether it be the long form video essays kind of breaking down specific topics, or Matt, I've seen a couple of your debates. And then of course this show. And I think all of these things are kind of appealing to possibly different audiences, definitely seeking somewhat different responses. And yeah, I mean, really just what I said. Do you think that this show is more successful in changing people's minds? Have you had more people approach you and say that, oh, this is kind of what clicked for me, or debates, or, breaking down things, responses? Yeah, I was just curious and kind of how do you approach that if you're approached on the street by a person face to face? What approach are you most typically taking?
Okay. I'm trying to think of how brutal I want to be right now. See, because I had... Okay, here we go. I don't know which of the areas of my work have been more effective. I don't know if the debates have been more effective at convincing people than the call-in shows. I don't know if the call-in shows are more effective than what I'm doing on my personal channel. I've received messages from people because of all of them. And I had potentially, I know it was over 1,000, but it may have been a couple of thousand people who emailed over the years to say, hey, I found myself out because of what you and your coworkers have done here and here and here and here. Unfortunately, some lying fuckheads on the board of directors for an organization decided in retaliation that they would lock me out of my emails. So the 18 years of emails I have that could provide the data that lets me know roughly how effective something is no longer available to me. So, for those folks, all my best. I miss you dearly. He said while holding up fingers for the people who couldn't see it. But here's the thing. I think it takes all of those. And I think that it is often best when there's a mix. I often looked for like the best way or the silver bullet or what convinced people to get out. And when somebody emails me, I ask them, and I've asked many times, this is another reason why I'm mad I don't have access to these conversations anymore. But I asked many times, hey, what was it? Was there a tipping point for you? Was there a thing that somebody said? And the majority of the responses, one or two of them might have had a, yes, you said this, and it was like, but most of them are, no, it was a cumulative thing where bits and pieces got whittled down, and it took, you had to chip away at this, you had to chip away at this, you had to chip away at this. And it appears that people find their way out for different reasons. And some of them are going to stumble across one of Paul's videos, and something, they're going to watch it and it's not going to impact them at all. And somebody else is going to watch one of Paul's videos and they're going to watch it and be like, wow, I've never heard anybody talk like this. And that becomes this process of somebody plants a seed and later on something happens. Because the first time you hear something that is foreign, it's just weird and you dismiss it. And then the second time you hear it, it's, ooh, I heard something like that before. And the third time is when you get to it being a pattern. And when you're a fundamentalist Christian in particular, or a religious person of that similar ilk, it seems that you need a pattern to let you normalize, whoa, there are non-believers and they understand and have read my holy book and they've thought about these things from a philosophical point, and God hasn't taken them out. And, it's little piece by piece. And then the sort of, to steal an apologist term, the sort of cumulative case against God, or the cumulative case showing that their arguments for God have failed. That seems to be the majority from my recollection, but I can no longer go back and assess that content because, some people are awful.
I borrow another thought from my evangelical days, and that Matt started with it, and that is just the notion of planting seeds, gardening, and the whole notion of the harvest, right? And when I was an evangelical, you were definitely trained in Bible school not to focus on the person who did the conversion at the end, because that's just the harvest. And if there wasn't all that work prior, the person who showed up at the end and gets the conversion, or in our case, the deconversion, it'd be weird for Matt or I to take credit for deconversions, even when people come up and say, it's because of you, because I know full well that, this was part of some process, almost always, right? So, I think Matt and I would both probably agree that the majority of our feedback is going to come from our personal channels versus call-in shows or whatever. Like, we're just not getting that feedback as directly. So we're probably going to have a bit of a skewed, reporting bias when it comes to that. But the reason I do like doing these kind of shows is exactly what Matt said. Is I feel like when I was deconverting, I needed all of these aspects, and a hard-hitting video on why young Earth creationism is stupid is maybe one person needs. And so I'm kind of rambling and repeating all that to say, I try not to focus on how many people came across the finish line, and focus on rather, did the person who came into my video move one step closer when they watched it. And if that's their last step, cool. But I don't try and worry about it too much.
And the last little note, just because it comes up over and over again, I also don't keep a tally. I just happen to know that there were a bunch of them. It was impressive, doing Atheist Experience for years and getting emails on a regular basis, including from people who are like, I watched you for 2 years and called in 5 times and you were an asshole and I set out to prove you wrong and that backfired and now I'm an atheist. That's happened. But my favorite one of all time, at a debate that I did with Abdu Murray in Lubbock, or near there, there was a young girl that came up after the debate was over, and she's like, hey, my parents are non-believers, but they've raised me to question everything and allowed me to explore, and I've gone to churches and all those other things, and I came to this debate tonight, and after tonight I'm an atheist. and I think she was like 11 or 12.
Oh,
And I've said for years that I would have taken the absolute worst calls available twice a week, every week for the next 20 years, just to get one more 11-year-old girl. It would be worth it. Fortunately,
yeah.
there have been many, and it's not me. Anytime somebody comes up to me at an event, they're like, "Oh my gosh, you're the reason I'm an atheist." I'm like, whoa. First of all, you don't get to blame that shit on me. But second of all, no, you did it. There were 25,000 other people that heard me say exactly what you heard me say, and they didn't change their mind. You did. So take credit for being open-minded and thinking and you know, being willing to follow the evidence where it goes instead of leading it where you want it to go. And that's the best answer that the two of us can give today, right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you guys have time for a quick follow-up, I guess I want to focus in specifically on the style of responses. You started the call off with how brutal do you want to get, and I think that that's kind of a theme that is overarching in most call-in shows, not just this one in particular.
To be fair, that question about how brutal I want to get is whether or not I wanted to mention the jackasses that stole my emails or not.
Right, absolutely. But you can understand what I'm referencing in terms of, like, obviously people are calling in and getting more aggressive themselves, but there is a more aggressive response from the host on this show more typically than say if you're debating Sam Harris or Jordan Peterson.
Well, to be fair, I don't know that you can say that, because if you look at the public debates that I've done,
yeah,
they don't look like the show, because I'm there with one individual and a moderator and rules. You haven't seen Sam Harris do this show.
That's true. That is true.
And you won't. Not because I got no problem with Sam doing it. I'm just saying I doubt Sam would.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess maybe a good example is Alex O'Connor. I have seen him come on. I think it was the Atheist Experience.
Once.
And I'm sorry?
Yeah, he was on once with me.
Yes. He was on once, and he tended to take a demeanor that was a little bit more not aggressive, but kind of like, you know, maybe more focused on entertainment than necessarily focusing on purely just the argument, as opposed to when he's doing debates or long form, similar to especially like Paul. I'm thinking of your content.
I don't know what the point is of this. Is there anybody that has spent any time? Is there anybody who's spent nearly as much time doing this as me? Has Alex done this as much as me? So one of the things is that if we're just going to compare styles, do I have a rougher style than some people? You bet. Who's reached more people, me or Alex? Don't know. I hope we both have reached billions. But and there's a chance. There are discussions about Alex and I doing an event together. We haven't spoken in a number of years since his little cult of vegan followers would come and comment on every video I did about the conversation. It was obnoxious, and now he's not a vegan anymore, but I guess he's survived the retaliation of that group. There was discussion about us possibly doing something. I got no beef with Alex, never have. Just blocked on Twitter. I blocked him on Twitter and sent him a message on Facebook saying, I'm done with this crap on there, because I called out somebody for something and it was immediately, yeah, but you're not a vegan, including from Alex, which is weird. I don't have any interest in dueling styles. I love the fact that Paul's style is different from mine, and the two of us can both work here. If somebody's like, oh, you're doing it wrong, cool. You go do it better, come back with some data and show that there's a better way, and I'll make changes. But I think I've done it a handful of different ways over the last 20 years. But anyway, this is not a, you know, you like who you like the style you like. I'm fine with all of it. I find it funny that I've never told anybody else how to do a show.
No, absolutely.
Doing it wrong. I don't think I've ever gone to anybody and said, you're doing the show wrong.
Well, and I think
I might have.
I'm sorry?
I might have. I just don't recall ever doing that. And yet, it's on the regular that somebody tells me I'm doing it wrong.
And I think that that's fundamentally wrong. I think that, yeah, saying that you're doing this incorrectly is a misunderstanding of what I think you're trying to achieve. But because even not based on an individual person, but based on how they're approaching a different setting. So, like you yourself, Matt, are going to approach this call-in show very differently to, I mean, I can't speak to it, but potentially even a person that you're speaking to, you know, just on the street or after a debate or, you know, at a meet and greet or whatever.
And I think anybody
and
who
so
doesn't is probably doing it wrong, he said as a callback. It's because, so here's the thing. Right now you're the last caller, Ryan. But before that, there were about
I don't want to keep you guys.
No, well, then stop interrupting me and it'll get here even quicker. Before we took the call, there were 5 or 6 people on hold. I'm here as the host of a show. If I just wanted to have a conversation with somebody on a phone about why they believe in God, I could do that. And I have done that. We could sit down, we could do a Skype call, we could do a Zoom call, whatever, and not even record it, just have the conversation. But this is a show. And so there are extra duties of the host, which are constantly keeping in mind there's thousands of people watching live. There are tens to hundreds of thousands of people going to be watching all or part of this over the next couple of months or years. And there's one person that's on the current active line, but there's 5 people on hold. Is the conversation I'm having with this person serving the current live audience, the future live audience, and is it taking up space that somebody on hold would be much better at? And am I giving enough time to the caller? Am I giving enough time to the co-host? Are we staying on topic? Are we rabbit trailing off into our side worlds? Are we spending time talking about tone patrolling and whose style is good? And if so, how fucking quickly can I hang up? That is all stuff that any of the hosts need to have in their mind. But the primary thing is this conversation going to benefit someone? Are we actively working to get to the truth, to either expose a flaw in one another's thinking or to present evidence for what each of us is claiming? That has to be the front. So if everybody finds the show boring, but it has amazingly good content that would actually help people, I don't care. You guys can whine all you want in chat and the mods can mute you. If the show is incredibly entertaining and everybody's laughing, but all they're doing is going, man, those creationists, they're so stupid. They called in and they did this. They're like flat earthers. I posted a video on Instagram a couple of days ago. It's got like 70,000 views on Instagram and over 100,000 views on Facebook. And it's only a few seconds long. And it's just a dumb little funny thing because I saw a flat earther use a temp gun, like I've got for checking the temperature in reptile enclosures, aimed a temp gun at the sun to measure the temperature of the sun in order to make a case about the flat earth. And I was like, that's so stupid. I want to do it just for lols. Because despite what some people think, I'm a funny motherfucker. And sometimes I like to have a good time. So we went out in the backyard and I pointed that thing up at the sky and got it up to where it's 544 degrees and pulled it down and showed off to the camera and, you know, made a quick joke at Flat Earth's expense. That video has got 100,000 views in one place and 70,000 views in another place. I put up a video on my own channel that's 20 minutes on this particular topic. It might get 30,000 views in that time frame. Why is a joke about taking the temperature of the sun? I get it. It's shorter. If my other content was shorter, it would probably get 100,000 views too. But it's just wild because I don't get upset about it. I'm not like, why is the important stuff not being viewed at the same rate that the stupid stuff is? And I don't get upset about it because I already know the answer. We need the stupid stuff because the important stuff would grind us down into oblivion. Just the sheer weight of the seriousness of everything that's going on. If you can't take a minute to laugh, yes, even if you're laughing at flat earthers, you're doomed. And so, yeah, I had fun with it. Anyway, that was a way for me to distract from this thing about tone and style to say, Ryan, is there any final point you'd like to make before we hang up on your ass?
No, this was a very enlightening conversation. I appreciate you guys' time.
Cool. Thanks so much, man.
All right,
And I appreciate your understanding too. It was a good way to end the calls for the show tonight. And on that note,
I'm gonna tag one thing on there, Matt, and that
That's
is
what I
that
did.
when I was deconverting, I absolutely needed Bible scholars. I needed Peter Enns, I needed Bart Ehrman, I needed that stuff. But if it were not for Ricky Gervais and George Carlin, I'm not sure that I would have come out. I needed both things. I needed to see what I believed being mocked in one corner, and then I needed the rational version. It's just like the other thing we said. All tones must be represented, or we're not going to hit everybody. Because even for myself, there was no single tone that was going to do it. So that's all I.
Yeah, it's my way out was a little different because it was pre-YouTube, and there were a number of people I listened to. Infidels.org. If you guys aren't already familiar with that website, it's important, and I owe all of the individuals that are over there. Eddie's over there, Rick's over there. There's a classical library and a modern library. There's tons of writings from legitimate scholars challenging, the evidence that demands a verdict crew and all of this. In some cases, going through it chapter by chapter and claim by claim, and writing up lists of things. Now, I'll caution you, as I always do, whether it's at infidels.org or other places, if you just looked up like Bible contradictions, you'll find all kinds of charts. There's a famous one that's just red lines showing everywhere in the Bible, everything. Not all of those are contradictions. Not all of those are even remotely problematic. Some of those are from incredibly confused people who didn't bother to do their homework. And so be very careful if you're going to bring those up. But there are good contradictions and passages that are problematic all throughout. Even something I love, I don't have it right here, Skeptic's Annotated Bible. I have my printed version. The website version is up. If you go through there verse by verse, they list contradictions and problems and stuff. Here's 500 problems in Scripture. Some of those are legit issues. Some are not. They're a good starting point for people to get a feel for how potentially broken some things about the Bible and religion are, but they are not the stopping point. Take those lists and use them to start an investigation. Go out and have fun. Go to carm.org, run by Matt Slick. Matt's going to freak out that I'm recommending this at all, but go to carm.org or someplace like that and see if they have posted an answer to your question, to the potential contradiction. Then take their answer and go find another apologist and find out what their answer is. And then find a third and compare all of them. And then in the same way that when people call in, you should ask yourself why they don't answer certain questions on the show. Ask yourself why 3 apologists, all supposedly in personal relationships with the risen Christ, who is God and emperor and ruler of the world, who knows everything, came up with 3 fucking different answers to why this scripture doesn't make any sense. One of my favorite debates of all time, I've mentioned it before, it's been a while and I've forgotten. It was Matt Slick against Jesse, I've forgotten the last name. They're both Christians. They have 2 completely different soteriologies. The soteriology is the study of what one must do to be saved. They're debating which Christian doctrine is most accurate. And this debate is online. You can look for it. Watch what they do. Each one of them gives verses that support their position. They don't really spend any time pointing at the other guy's verses and saying, ooh, you got this wrong. Ooh, you got this wrong. Ooh, you got this wrong. And here's why. No. It's here's the verses that support my position. Here's the verses that support my position. Whatever shall we do? I guess we'll each proclaim we're right. It is watching. It may have been Jesse Morrell. You'd have to find out. Dig around a little bit, but it's genuinely. It's one of my top 5 favorite debates. Sean Carroll and William N. Craig, where he pulls up the video or the picture of I think it was Guth that he pulled up for the Board Guth for Lincoln model. Anyway, that's in my top 2 as well. Yeah. Somebody seems to have verified. Jesse Morrell, JESSEMORELL. Watch it. You can learn stuff. You can go out. You think Paul and I got to a point where we're able to take on calls and speak on 20 different topics at something beyond a surface level and have an understanding of what Christian apologists or Jewish apologists, although they're rarer, would have to say without actually talking to them and reading what they wrote and engaging with them and finding their disagreement. When I say there were 4 apologists standing around me, all giving 4 different excuses for slavery at a debate, I'm not even joking. They were all standing in a semicircle around me, trying to challenge my take on slavery, and each one of them had a different explanation for slavery. And I said, you guys sort out which one of you is right, and whichever one of you is right, I'll debate that one. Give me a call when you agree. I'm never going to hear from any of them. It's embarrassingly bad. Anyway, Arden, who we all adore and who is generally better than me, maybe not better than Paul, but probably better than Paul.
Probably. Yeah.
It's just, she's down the hall. And not only did she work this week, and tomorrow is a heavy work day for us rodent-wise, but she's been here through 2 shows. And I promised that I would say something at the beginning of the show, which I did not, which was a reminder that on the Sunday show and the Sunday show after dark, we do not read the super chats. So anybody who sent super chats in, expecting them to be read, that's not what happens on the Sunday shows, but it does happen on all the other shows on the Line Network. And let me give you a reminder of what's coming up on those shows. Today, we're done. Tomorrow is Skeptalk with John Gleason and Aron Ra. Tuesdays, Chewed Gum with Eve and Alyssa. Wednesday, Andrew Seidel will be joining me on the Hang Up. Thursday at 2 p.m., Transatlantic Call-In Show with Josie Caballero and Alexander. And then next week, Jimmy and Eve will be on the regular Sunday show, and I'll be back on the Sunday show after dark with Eric. Paul, before I tell Arden to put up the credits, what do you got in the pipeline? What should we be expecting?
I'm working on a delicious video with 2 Hebrew scholars, Dr. Kip Davis and Dr. Joshua Bowen, and we are doing the definitive reason why the conquests in the Old Testament, like Joshua and all those kind of things, can't have happened. So I'm excited for that because scholars are doing the heavy lifting, not me.
You guys are basically doing, there's like the Israel Finkelstein, book on how the Exodus didn't happen. And you guys have now gotten together to try to do that for all the other conquests in the Old Testament.
That's correct. That's exactly correct. Yeah.
I'm genuinely excited. People who know me will know, Matt's trying to wrap up the show and Arden's getting ready to put the credits up and he's just giving his co-host an opportunity to say what's going on. Now I'm genuinely excited. And if you're excited, you can find Paul's information down below I'm assuming it's down below.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Paulogia, I'm the only one.
Hosts. Yep.
There we go. Yeah. All the content and stuff for all the hosts is down there. That's it for us. Huge thank you to our call screener and thank you to all of our moderators. Everybody who called in had a really good time, had a couple of really good conversations. One of those individuals to call back. Thanks to all our patron producers there. Don't forget to go to linemerch.com to find any of the line merch that you want. You can also contribute at paypal.me/Mr. Atheist, at cash.app/ $Jimmy A. Snow. And then there's an Amazon wish list and a bunch of other stuff down there. And we mention that in part because we keep getting demonetized. Patreon.com/call the line.